The groom's ex ruined our wedding, so I left him at the altar. Now his parents are offering to buy me a house to make up for it, but he's demanding I hand it over because he's homeless. My ex-fiance's old flame barged into our wedding and wrecked the whole day, so I left him standing there at the altar. Now his parents are trying to buy me a house to make up for everything, but he is insisting I give it to him because he has nowhere to live. Let me start from the beginning. I was supposed to get married last month. Everything was ready, the plans were made, but it all blew up because Scott, my ex-fiancé, turned out to be a fool. Now he is driving me out of my mind because his parents want to give me a house as an apology, and he thinks I should turn it down. I honestly have no clue what I should do. For some background, Scott and I are both 25. We met in college and had been together ever since we graduated. Even though we had a lot of back and forth flirting while we were students, he never asked me out until we were done with school. Once he finally got the nerve, I said yes. We dated for a couple of years, and last year he proposed. I accepted. Until recently, I would have said our relationship was just about perfect. I truly believed nothing could ever go wrong between us. Clearly, I was wrong. Before I came along, Scott had only dated one other woman, his childhood sweetheart, Caroline. I had never met her in person, but I had seen a few old pictures of her in his high school yearbooks. Scott and Caroline were even voted best couple when they graduated. It made sense, they had been together since middle school. Scott never really talked about her, but from what his friends said, they had been inseparable as kids. They went from being best friends in elementary school to dating in middle school. By high school, they were already talking about getting married someday. Things fell apart when Caroline's father pushed her to attend a business school in New York, which was way too far for them to keep their relationship steady. They tried the long-distance thing, but the fighting got worse, and they eventually broke up just a few months into college. I did not know any of this when Scott and I started dating. He introduced me to his old school friends about 3 months into our relationship, and that is when I found out. At first, I thought it was strange that he had never mentioned Caroline, considering how serious they had been. They had plans for the future together, and I figured that was something worth sharing. Especially since, by the time they split up, Scott and I were already friends, and there had been some playful flirting between us. I had no idea he had just gotten out of a serious breakup. Even after we became a couple, Scott never brought Caroline up. He had scrubbed all signs of her from his social media too, so there was no way I would have found out about her unless someone slipped up. And that is exactly what happened. It was at Scott's birthday party, the same night I met the last group of his friends I had not met yet. His family knew me already, and his college friends did too, but these were his old school buddies. We thought it would be a nice dinner for everyone to get introduced. After dinner, Scott had to step out to take a call from a relative. His friends stayed behind, joking around and making noise. While he was outside, one of his friends said he was happy Scott and I were doing so well because he had never thought Scott would move on from Caroline. I must have made a face because right then they realized I had no idea who Caroline was. They tried to cover it up, but the damage was done. I pushed until they explained everything. Hearing that Scott and Caroline had been together since they were kids and had plans to marry was a gut punch. I knew I had to talk to Scott about it. Once the guests left and Scott came back inside, I confronted him. I asked why he had never mentioned her. It felt like he had hidden a huge part of his life from me. Scott looked uncomfortable immediately. He tried to act like it was not important. He told me it was just a silly high school romance that meant nothing to him anymore. But I was hurt that he had kept it secret. I told him it mattered to me, but he refused to discuss it. The more I pressed, the more defensive he got, until finally he snapped and told me to mind my own business. That turned into our first big argument. I ended up leaving and staying at a friend's house that night because I could not stand to be around him. He told me it was not his job to make me feel secure, especially over something he said was ancient history. He tried to spin it as if I had trust issues because I was upset over a relationship he had years ago. Somehow, Scott managed to convince me that I had overreacted. He said the only reason he had not told me about Caroline was because he feared I would blow it out of proportion, just like I was doing now. A few days later, after thinking it over and feeling guilty, I apologized. He accepted, on the condition that I would never bring up Caroline again. Scott said Caroline had been clingy and annoying, and thinking about her only made him feel like he had wasted years of his life. That was why he had not wanted to talk about her. I agreed to drop it, and we moved on. I met his old friends several times after that, but nobody mentioned Caroline again. I figured Scott had warned them to keep quiet. One of his friends did run into me at the grocery store a couple of weeks later. He apologized for bringing up Caroline that night and said he never meant to cause a fight between us. He told me I had nothing to worry about, that Scott was much happier with me than he ever had been with her. I wanted to believe it, and honestly, it made me feel better. I convinced myself that Scott really had moved on, and there was nothing to be concerned about. After that, Caroline became a forgotten chapter, at least for a while. Scott and I kept living our lives. We had the usual ups and downs that every couple has, but nothing major. I never second-guessed marrying him. I should have, though. I should have paid more attention to the way he refused to talk about Caroline, because in the end, she was the reason our wedding never happened. Even the morning of our wedding, everything seemed perfect. Scott was grinning ear to ear. There was no sign that anything was wrong. I walked down the aisle with my heart full, believing we were about to start the rest of our lives together. Then it happened. Caroline stormed into the ceremony like something out of a bad movie. She shouted for the ceremony to stop. She said she could not let Scott marry me because she knew deep down he was her soulmate. I recognized her instantly from those old yearbook photos. I never wanted to meet her, and certainly not like this. I stood there frozen at the altar. So did Scott. Everyone in the room went dead silent. We had not hired any security because it was supposed to be a small, private wedding. We were holding it on Scott's uncle's property, which was not open to the public. Hardly anyone even knew the exact location. But that did not stop her. At first, I thought Scott would tell her to leave, that he would defend me and our relationship. After all, he had always said he wanted nothing to do with her. Instead, he started talking to her. Right there in front of everyone, Scott asked how she had even found out about the wedding. He completely forgot about our vows. Caroline said she had stayed in touch with a few of his old friends, and when she heard he was getting married, she realized she could not stay away. She said she still loved him and had just been waiting, hoping he would come back to her. She explained that she had wanted to talk to him before the ceremony but had been delayed by traffic. She said if Scott was sure about me, she would leave and let him be. But if he had any doubts, she wanted to work things out. And the worst part? Scott did not immediately send her packing. Instead, he started arguing with her about how their relationship ended, about how hurt he was when she left for New York. He accused her of being selfish. Caroline apologized and said she had changed. Meanwhile, I was still standing at the altar like a fool while they hashed out their past right in front of all our guests. By the time almost 10 minutes had gone by since Caroline interrupted the ceremony, I finally snapped out of it. They were still standing up there, completely caught up in talking about their past, like I was not even there. It hit me hard, I was not even part of this story anymore. I felt humiliated standing there while Scott gave her his full attention. Everyone, including my parents and bridesmaids, stayed frozen in their seats. Honestly, I could not blame them. The whole thing was so bizarre, nobody knew how to react. I could not stand it another minute. I turned and walked away from the altar because it was painfully clear to me then, no matter what Scott said, he still had feelings for Caroline. He had been stringing me along the entire time. Even when I walked away, he did not chase after me. All he said was that he would come find me later after he sorted out the situation and that I should wait for him back at the hotel. When I got to my room, I broke down completely. It was crazy to think that instead of standing up for me, instead of protecting what we were supposed to have, Scott was standing there talking to her, making things worse by the minute. My wedding day, the day I had dreamed about for so long, turned into an absolute disaster. It felt like something out of a bad movie, except I was not the lead, I was the fool who got abandoned because her fiancé could not let go of his ex. About 15 minutes later, my parents and bridesmaids came to my room. They told me they had left the venue because Scott and Caroline were still deep in conversation and had stepped aside for a private talk. Hearing that crushed what little hope I had left. I knew right then the wedding was not going to happen. My parents said they had already told all our guests to go home. They suggested I pack up my things and come home with them, and I agreed immediately. There was no point in staying. My bridesmaids stayed behind to handle the mess with the guests while I threw my things together and got ready to leave. The whole drive home, I sat in the backseat crying while my mother tried her best to comfort me. Deep down, I was still clinging to a tiny shred of hope that maybe Scott would call, tell me he had thrown Caroline out, and beg me to come back. But that call never came. Instead, hours later, Scott finally texted me. He said he had decided not to marry me, and he was not getting back with Caroline either. He claimed he needed time to be alone and figure out his feelings. In other words, all of this heartbreak, all of this humiliation, had been for nothing. In his message, he explained that talking to Caroline made him realize he had never fully gotten over her. That was why it had been so hard for him to even mention her around me. Now that he had faced those feelings, he realized he could not just shove them aside anymore. He said it would not be fair to me to move forward while he was still confused, so he was ending things between us and with her until he sorted himself out. Scott said his parents would cover all the costs related to the wedding, and he apologized for everything that had happened. He said he hoped someday I could forgive him, but for now, he thought we both needed space. Reading that text shattered me all over again. I cried so hard I almost made myself sick. I could not even go back to the house Scott and I had lived in together. I stayed with my parents while they helped me get back on my feet. Scott's parents handled everything else. They were kind and apologetic, reaching out to me personally to say how sorry they were. They made it clear they were ashamed of their son's behavior and wanted to help me however they could. But honestly, I did not blame them. None of this was their fault. Scott's choices were his own. After the vendors were paid and the mess was cleaned up, I decided to step back from everything. I needed time to think, to heal. After all, it is not every day you spend months planning your dream wedding, only to have it torn apart by your fiancé's unfinished business with an ex-girlfriend. Now, almost a month later, I can laugh about it a little. Therapy has helped. Talking about it has helped. But it still stings. I cut Scott out of my life completely. I deleted my social media accounts, blocked his number, blocked him everywhere. After I sent him one final text telling him I was making his decision easier by walking away, I cut him off for good. He did not try to reach out again after that. A few weeks ago, though, his parents came by and told me something surprising. Scott's father had recently been promoted to chief executive officer, and with that came a big raise. They had originally planned to buy us a house as a wedding gift. Now, since the wedding was off, they still wanted to give me the house as a way to make things right. At the time, I was still living with my parents. I had not gone back to the house Scott and I leased because I could not stand the thought of running into him. My bridesmaids had gathered my belongings for me. When they arrived to pack up, the place was already empty. Scott had moved out first. The landlord told me Scott had canceled his part of the lease, so the house was technically mine alone. I explained everything that had happened and told him I could not stay there either. I could not afford the rent by myself, and emotionally, I just could not go back. Right now, I have nowhere permanent to stay, and I know I cannot live with my parents forever. So when Scott's parents offered to still buy me a house, I was grateful. I saw no reason to turn down such a generous offer. But somehow Scott found out about it, and now he has been harassing me using different phone numbers, trying to guilt me into refusing the house. Apparently, he is living out of his car now and believes he deserves the house instead. Scott refuses to explain exactly how he ended up homeless or why he is not speaking to his parents. He keeps saying it is none of my concern. All he cares about is making sure I do not take the house because, in his mind, he needs it more than I do. But the way I see it, I have every right to accept the offer. I need a place to live too. Why should I sacrifice it just because he made a mess of his own life? Update 1. After thinking about it for a while, I decided to lay it all out for Scott. I told him plain and simple I was not going to give him any benefit of the doubt unless he told me the whole truth about how he ended up living in his car. I guess he realized he had no other choice, because he finally opened up. Turns out, right after the disaster of a wedding day, Scott quit his job. He did not even give his boss the 2 weeks' notice, he just walked away. He claimed he needed time for soul searching and took off for the Japanese islands, where he spent about a week blowing through most of his savings. He did not check in with anyone, not his parents, not his friends, not even a quick message. Nothing. He thought he could just come back after that little vacation, and his parents would welcome him home with open arms. but they were furious when he showed up out of nowhere, expecting a place to stay. They fought. Scott told them he did not need their help anyway, but after he left, he realized he had nowhere to go. He had already cancelled the lease on our old place, and now he had no backup plan. He said he could get a new apartment, but it would take time. He needed a job first, and at that moment, he had no steady income. Staying with friends was not an option either. After what happened with Caroline at the wedding, Scott had fallen out with almost all of them. He blamed them for leaking details about our wedding to Caroline and accused them of betraying him. So now he had no friends willing to help either. At that point, Scott had nobody left. No place to stay. No job. No money. That was when he found out about his parents' offer to buy me a house. Apparently, his father's real estate agent had been reaching out to Scott, thinking he was still getting married. The realtor did not know the wedding was called off. When Scott found out his father was buying a house and that it was not for him but for me, he lost it. He pieced it together because the realtor said Scott's dad had asked for properties near my workplace. That was how Scott realized the house was meant for me. I will admit it must have taken him a lot of digging to figure that out. Once Scott finished explaining all this, I realized I did not need anything more from him. I listened until he finished, said nothing, and then hung up. I blocked that number too. Maybe it was petty, but honestly, after everything he put me through, I figured I had earned the right to be a little cold. Scott's mistakes had nothing to do with me anymore. I was not about to let guilt or pity change that. Update 2. After giving it some serious thought, I decided to reach out to Scott's parents. I told them I was ready to accept their offer. Honestly, I felt like I had earned it after everything that had happened. I also told them about Scott's situation, that he was homeless and living out of his car. They thanked me for letting them know, but they made it clear they were not going to reward him for his behavior. They said they were more than willing to help him if he took responsibility for what he had done and apologized. But if he was going to stay stubborn and refuse to own up to his mistakes, then there was not much they could do for him. I completely agreed. It was about time Scott learned to clean up his own mess without expecting someone else to fix it. Since I hung up on him during that last call, Scott has not stopped trying to get in touch. Different phone numbers, different tactics, always trying to get me to back off from accepting the house. But that door is closed now, and he can knock all he wants. I am not answering. I hope, for his own sake, he figures that out sooner rather than later. Honestly, it is getting a little pathetic at this point. Update 3. It has been a couple of weeks since my last update, and I can finally say I have moved into my new house. Scott's parents, along with my own, helped make everything happen. A few days ago, I even hosted a small housewarming party. I invited everyone who had been part of the wedding plans, mostly because I wanted to thank them for being so supportive when everything went sideways. The party turned out great. Everyone seemed genuinely happy to see me doing better. They told me I looked more at peace than the last time they saw me, and they were right. I do feel better now. Having my own space, something that is truly mine, has made a huge difference. As for Scott, I have no idea what he is doing, and honestly, I do not care. Some of my friends, being a little nosy, did some digging online. From what they found, it looks like Scott is now living with Caroline. At least, that is what it seems like from the background of his social media posts. All the decorations and furniture definitely suggest a woman's touch. But whether he is living with her or not, it does not matter to me anymore. That part of my life is over. He can live wherever he wants, with whoever he wants, as long as he stays far away from me.